This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Today in the news, we turn to the Central Bank of Nigeria, where the sum of $2.4 billion have been uncovered in invalid foreign exchange claims. Now, this discovery was made when the CBN had its books audited by Deloitte after the CBN said that it inherited a backlog of $7 billion in unmet dollar demands from investors and currency users. These details were revealed by the governor of the CBN, Mr. Yemi Cardoso, during a television interview this week. To shed more light on this situation, we're joined by Kelvin Emmanuel. Mr. Emmanuel is an economist and the CEO at Dairy Hills Limited. Mr. Emmanuel, good morning and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning.
You're welcome. Right off the bat, Mr. Emmanuel, what was your reaction when you heard the news of the CBN's discovery of $7 billion in unmet dollar demands?
So you meant when I heard the news that $2.4 billion of the seven are only transactions that were not backed by any from M documents.
That is correct,
right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I'm not surprised. And I'm also not surprised given the fact that you could see the circulars that came out last week on the naked positions the banks have, net positions. And, we blame the government a lot. We always talk about the government as a problem that Nigeria has. And in actual fact, leadership is the problem in Nigeria. But we also have to acknowledge that followership is also the problem of leadership. Okay? And in my view, I believe you having $2.4 billion of invalid transactions after forensic audit was done by one of the big four consulting firms to ascertain the veracity of the authenticity of those forward capital-led commercial letters of credit, capital and remittances, of a request. Yeah, it goes to show you that we have a lack of institutional integrity in Nigeria, and that is a problem. You have a situation, for example, where these forwards were given because Nigerians called man new man, and were not backed by any documentation. Yeah, and you have, for example, banks ignoring the rules of engagement in the market, holding net operations billions of dollars, that's causing speculation, it's causing your exchange rate to widen the rate, leading to inflation. I'm not putting all the blame on them because the CBN has the issues that it has. It has the issues of indiscriminate loans that were taken, monies that were printed, and the fact that it's always money to defend the currency, management finance issues, and net reserves were drawn down to negative territory. It has these issues, but we also need to put blame where it belongs, squarely, proportionately. And it is important that the players and stakeholders in the market obey the rules of engagement,
Right.
so that there will be probity in the market, and some people who are benefiting will not place every other person at risk.
Right, Mr. Emmanuel, to zero in on this, what exactly has been the effects of these, the entire $7 billion that was discovered? The CBN has paid a portion of it. They've been repeating that it's been the verified claims that they have paid. Now, for the backlog, some of which they are saying is unverified, some of which they are saying doesn't have any business being owed by the CBN, what has been the effect on the market, and is that in any way related to the pressure that the Naira is facing at the moment?
The effect on the market is that the failure to pay the outstanding forward is a disincentive for foreign direct investors and foreign portfolio investors coming into Nigeria. It's also a disincentive for people to hold their funds in Naira, and the capital flight to US assets was a major part of that program. there is a negative return on yield, and between the MPR rate, money policy rate, interest rate, and the inflation rate, headline inflation, which currently stands at 10.15%. So the impact of you not meeting your forward, that the bank say that they are unable to open LCs on the list of requests. But then it is discouraging to find out that the banks also aided and abetted the submission of requests that were not backed by application.
So, with this discovery, Mr. Emmanuel, with this discovery, is it possible for you to tell us what you believe will be the CBN's next course of action?
The CBN is acting. They're taking action. All the circulars they received, they released. First one they released was the banks not holding positions, all-in rates, and all-in rates simply talks about different things. Rate primary dealers or banks get effects from the central bank. The second check talks about the rate at which they trade, which is a different rate, and the significant spread that makes a lot of. So the central bank is acting on the circular release last week, and especially because if those circulars are actually implemented without any interference from the fiscal authority, they're going to see the rate adjust back to anywhere around 1,000 to 8,000. I will encourage the Central Bank of Nigeria to suspend the license, the foreign exchange dealership license of any bank that refused to obey the circular that were released last week. That's what I will encourage the CBN government to do, because there has to be consequence of that behavior.
Right, and then sort of to address this directly. Now, with this amount of money in conversation, does this in any way constitute economic sabotage of some sort? And I'm asking this because the line of thought is whether or not we'll see the EFCC get involved if it comes to that point.
Well, I don't know what decisions the government will decide to take. It's completely up to them. I'm not going to preempt them because I'm not a member of the government. But the law, right? So, the government knows what to do. I'm not going to preempt them or predict what they might do. But like I said, there has to be consequence of that behavior. In developed countries, when players or stakeholders violate the laws so much like this, in instances, they are piled up with heavy fines, and hundreds of dollars, in rare cases, billions of dollars. I'm not saying that the CBN should move to that volume, but those consequences happen so that the players in the market realize that the government does not shy of acting and making possible decisions that affect the market and bring everybody back to a level playing field. So,
of course,
there's no consequence of bad behavior. There's an incentive for people to repeat what they've done in the past.
Well, Mr. Emmanuel, thank you very much for speaking with us on this morning. Our guest, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel, is an economist and the CEO at Diary Hills Limited. He joined us to speak on the CBN's discovery of as much as $2.4 billion uncovered invalid foreign exchange claims at the bank. The conversation continues in just a moment as we turn our attention to Niger State, where protests erupted yesterday over the rising cost of living in the state. Do stay with us.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Still today in the news, citizens of Niger State yesterday took to the streets to protest the hardships that they are facing due to rising costs of living. The protest started when a group of women blocked the Mina Bida road at the Bakungu roundabout to express their grievances over the rising cost of food items. Reports indicate that policemen deployed to the scene attempted to disperse the crowd and resorted to firing shots in the air. This morning, we're joined by journalist with Daily Trust newspapers, Mr. Abubakar Sadiq Akote, who joins us to give an update on the state of affairs. Mr. Akote, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's my pleasure.
Right. So can you give us sort of an overview of what happened in Niger State, specifically Mina, yesterday?
Actually, yesterday being Monday, we woke up to a protest started by a group of women, mostly housewives, who blocked Mina Bida Road at the popular Bakungu roundabout to protest the hardship and arising from the rising cost of foodstuffs. And then they were later joined by men, and the population, the crowd became a bit large, and later the police and other security police were deployed to disperse the protesters, and it almost turned into violence when the protesters insisted that the police operatives should leave them to allow them to protest.
Right. The reports that we received from Niger State yesterday indicated that the police resorted to firing gunshots into the air. Is that correct?
Due to when police arrived the scene, the deputy governor was also there, and the deputy governor tried to appeal to the protesters to return home, that the government was going to look into the problem. But the protesters felt aggrieved, and then they asked police to leave. And then in the process, police were reluctant, trying to use force. And then they started firing tear gas, and then the protesters also resorted to stoning. They started stoning the police. That was when police started firing gunshots into the air to scare them away. Although some of them, even with that, they defied the police, the gunshot and tearing gas, and then it took hours before security operatives were able to control them. They had to call for reinforcement from the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Code and then DSS, and then before the situation was brought under control.
Mr. Akote, what is the chief complaint here from those who protested yesterday?
I had an interview with one of the women who led the group. She complained that the cost of living is becoming unbearable. Their men are finding it difficult to live up to their responsibility due to hardship. Some men who are government workers, their salaries have not been increased. And then the cost of living is going high on a daily basis. As of yesterday, a mudu of rice in Mina was between 2,200 naira and 2,500 naira. That was local rice. We're not talking of foreign one, imported rice. And then the maize that was initially, before now, you could get it at even at the rate of 450, 500 naira in the market. It's now 1,000, 1,100 naira. Gari that many families fell back at in recent times. Doing a ban or the rest of them. As of yesterday, the price of Gari was 800 naira per mudu. So those coupled with that, and then some of them also complained that the hardship is causing a lot of broken homes because men who are finding it difficult to meet up because of stress, the trauma they go through, or daily, especially those that are doing menial jobs. The jobs are not forthcoming, and the family are there to feed. So they had a slight misunderstanding or slight complaint from wife, it led to divorce and the rest of them, and then leaving the burden of children now on the mother. Some of them said that when the children cry for as a result of hunger, asking for food, their fathers are not always at home, so they are the ones bearing the brunt of everything. So that's why they started the protest. that government should allow the situation to look into the matter and make sure that the price of foodstuffs are put under control for poor people to survive.
Finally, Mr. Akote, what does Mina look like today? Is there a repeat protest going on, or has it reverted to?
As of yesterday, the Niger State governor said a specified number of people were arrested, and he assured that they were going to be prosecuted. The governor believed that the women rarely protest, no matter how bad the situation is. So he believed that yesterday's narrative was engineered by some people he believed who have an ulterior motive. And he said some trucks were coming from Lagos to pass through Mina to Abuja with food items, which some people believe belong to government. So that they getting information, they were the one that asked the women to start the protest so that they will join them. And then by the time they caused the blockade of the road, when the trucks get to Mina, they can start stealing from the truck, according to what the governor said yesterday, which was on record. So that was the interpretation he gave to the protest, even though the protesters said their motive was not to steal, but to let government know what they were going through. So the situation is calm now because the governor, even as of yesterday evening, the security operators were positioned in strategic locations, and even the government warehouses, government stores were yesterday manned by security operatives to ensure that the people don't go to those places and then start stealing government foods in government reserves. So the situation is calm this morning. Nothing is going on this morning. Everybody is going about its normal businesses.
Mr. Akote, thank you very much for speaking with us this morning. Our guest on the conversation is a journalist out of Niger State, Mr. Abubakar Sadiq Akote, and he joined us to give an update on the protest that took place in Mina, the Niger State capital, yesterday, when women took to the streets to protest the rising cost of living. The conversations continue this morning on Now Breakfast. Up next is Naira and Kobo. Do stay with us.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
On our conversation this morning on Tech Now, we speak with a journalist with Tech about Mr. Timi Odueso. Now, our conversation centers around the fact that African startups seem to have gotten off to a rather slow start for the year 2024, raising some $83 million across 31 deals that were disclosed in January. Now, this particular amount is a decline from the $545.1 million that were raised in 20 deals during the month of January 2023. It's representing an 84.8% drop from its heights of 2023. Radio Now's Nabila Usman had a conversation with Timi Odueso of Tech Cabal to understand what exactly this latest drop in funding means for African startups.
I think, of course, looking at it first, it was concerning because from where we left off last year, I think ending December with about 100 and something million, and then starting off the new year with 53 million. It would be concerning just to look at it. But when we were ending last year, when we spoke to investors and startup ecosystem players across Africa, one thing everyone was sure, or one thing everyone reiterated, was that 2024 would be probably one of the harder years for Africa's tech ecosystem because investors are becoming more frugal with funds. People are looking a lot more deeper before they even join startups and invest in tech across the continent. So it made sense, I guess, because we had the info beforehand that, look, this year is going to be harder, and not hard in the general sense that it's going to be really bad, but just that if you're going to raise, you have to have a product that really works, that people are already using. You actually have to be an MVP at the moment. So, yeah, when I corrected the numbers, I was like, 83 million is a bit small there, but then remembering what all the investors said last year, it made more sense. And then also considering the data we had from 2023 and 2022, it was just like, this is actually a stable growth. It's not a decline. It's a decline, but it's not as a big decline that should be bothered or concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, hearing this breakdown and hearing the figures, it strikes me that perhaps startups would have to look a lot more in the local direction, right? Especially if they have to prove that they have a product that's already functional, they've got a market that's willing and ready and has the potential for expansion. So do you see this? Is this what we're likely to expect, that will look more inwards than outwards?
Yes. So across the continent, we're already seeing a lot more startups supporting startups. So similar to how we have women, people supporting people, we have startup support, big startups supporting startups. So towards the end tail of last year, we had a startup called Bitmama acquire a smaller startup called PD. And acquisitions last year went, they were steady across the ecosystem. But one of the trends we saw was that startups or companies across Africa are acquiring smaller companies. So if you take a company like Access Bank or Access Holding Co. now, when they want to expand to a new country, instead of building from the ground up, they look for companies that have similar infrastructures to what they want to build in that country, and they acquire that company. And that means that, startups are going to look more inward. We already have angel investors like Mia Boyaji, we have companies like Accelerate Africa, we have there's Olumide VC firm, I think it's We Capital. All these companies are also investing in African startups. So yes, we will be looking more, startups will need to look a little bit more local. We have international funding sources like Y Combinator, which have funded African startups over the years. They've now delved down on African startups. So for example, in 2020, 2021, 2022, Y Combinator used to get in as much as 10 African startups per year. But now, but now they're doing only three African startups per cohort. So the last cohort had 3, the one before that had 3, and that's how it's going to be. So if African startups will need to look a lot more inward moving forward, and the resources are there. There are investors looking for viable startups to put their funds in and actually support.
You mentioned that this didn't come as a surprise, and anyone who's been paying attention globally knows that, a lot of the investors are being a lot more, would I say, picky with their money. Yet I can't help but ask if it's as a result of what we're seeing globally, or if it's as a result of some of the companies we saw that packed up last year.
So it's a global thing. It's not an African thing. So we need to startups across the world. We have startups that will always make mistakes, but the funding decline, the funding winter is global. So funding across the world is shrinking in terms of tech startups and everything. And investors globally are looking to invest in more. If you don't have something that's early at that good stage already, something viable that you already have users, and you're probably not going to get investors as easy as you could a couple of years ago. So it's a global phenomenon. And yes, of course, it has to do a lot with so similar to the dot-com bubble crash that we had in 2004, it's also what we're finding now. We're finding that investors are being frugal. Their macroeconomic conditions, the different wars, fuel prices, all these things are making money is tough for everyone. So it's also affecting investors now. And now they are withholding funds and saying, look, if we're going to invest in something, it has to be something that actually gives us money back. We don't have as much money to kick that door and find only ventures that we can risk for. Yeah, so across the world, it's a global thing. It's not an African thing.
So when we look at the continent, you point out that Africa as a whole received about 11.45% of funding for January. And then the breakdown has North Africa with the most at about 30%. Then you've got East Africa with 28%, West with 20%, and Southern Africa with 9%. What's informing the figures?
What's informing the figures are the startups that are raising funds in these regions. So where the location of how we calculate the location of startups involved. And for this, it changes month on month. So some months you find that investors are finding Africa more viable, and other months you find North Africa is easy. So for 2 years in a row now, for January, North Africa has led. And last year's one was due to a really large acquisition deal. This year we had a couple of logistics startups. I think 3 logistics startups raised quite a bit of money from North Africa. So they were all in Egypt. And I would guess on my own personal opinion that logistics is doing very well because of a couple of things, especially in North Africa. You have a company called Swivel, and last year Swivel turned things around. They actually made a profit, and it makes the moment you can make a profit there, it means that there's going to be a boom in that industry. It means that investors are going to focus on what are these guys doing right. Startups are going to look what's Swivel doing right, what can we emulate, and then they're going to build their own company and that try to emulate what Swivel is doing, and then bring their own ideas to the investors and get more money. So logistics did very well in North Africa last year. But also you have places like East Africa that are doing really well because they have better tax policies compared to West Africa. Ease of doing business in places like Nigeria is very difficult. So getting regulatory approvals and all that, it can be very difficult and hectic. But in places like Rwanda, where the government is very receptive to startups and the government is very receptive to the tech ecosystem, very involved in the co-creation of an enabling environment, it's easy to invest in Rwanda. Kenya is a little bit more difficult, but East Africa generally is more receptive when it comes to tech policies than West Africa is. So investors, because again, they don't want to put their money where the venture is not going to be profitable. They don't want anything difficult. Investors are going to move towards these spaces that allow them to allow startups to thrive and succeed.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM.